There are two words that change how a woman experiences every interaction with a man, and they are never spoken out loud. That is what makes them so easy to miss. You have probably spent a fair amount of time thinking about what to say, the right opener, the right compliment, the right moment to express interest. And none of that is entirely irrelevant, but it is operating at the surface of something much deeper, and if what lives beneath the surface is not in order, the words on top of it will never quite land the way you want them to. Here is the part that catches most men off guard. The two words are not a technique. They are not a phrase you memorize and deploy at the right moment. They are an internal orientation, something that is either present in you or absent, and women detect it within the first few minutes of any conversation, long before either of you has said anything particularly revealing. What are the two words, and why do they work on a psychological level that bypasses everything a woman thinks she is looking for? By the end of this video, you will know exactly what they are, how they work, how to recognize whether you already carry them, and what quietly changes when you do. When a woman says a man has a way with words, she almost never means his vocabulary. She means something she felt, something that happened underneath the words entirely. This is where most conventional advice about talking to women goes wrong. It focuses on content, what to say, when to say it, which topics to raise and which to avoid. And content matters, in the way that the melody of a song matters. But what a woman is actually listening to, at a level below her conscious evaluation, is not the melody. It is the instrument producing it. She is reading the source, what communication researchers describe as paralinguistic information. The emotional and psychological data carried alongside the literal meaning of words is processed by the human brain faster and more reliably than verbal content. In plain terms, how something is said tells a more accurate story than what is said, and that story is received and evaluated before the conscious mind has caught up. This is why a man can say something entirely ordinary and produce a profound feeling of connection, while another man can say something technically impressive and produce nothing. The specific mechanism here is coherence. When a man's internal state, his body language, his tone, and his verbal content are all telling the same story, when they are all aligned around the same underlying orientation, the woman across from him experiences that alignment as a felt sense of realness. Something in her registers it as trustworthy, as settled, as safe in the deepest possible meaning of that word. Now you might push back here and say, surely what you actually say matters. And yes, of course it does. Words have meaning and meaning matters. But the same words spoken from two different internal places produce two completely different experiences for the woman receiving them. The words are not the variable. The place they come from is. Before the two words themselves are named, there is something important to understand about how women process attraction in real time. Because without this, the words themselves will seem too simple to be true. A woman does not sit across from a man and evaluate him point by point, the way you might review a list. She feels a single impression, and it forms faster than either of you realizes. This surprises a lot of men when they first encounter it, because male evaluation tends to be more sequential and analytical. You might assess a situation by running through a series of observations and arriving at a conclusion. Female attraction assessment does not work that way. It works holistically, impressionistically, and fast, often forming a dominant feeling within the first 3 to 5 minutes of interaction that is remarkably resistant to revision afterward. What neuroscientists studying social cognition sometimes call global person perception, the rapid formation of a unified impression of someone's character and intent, is more developed in women on average, likely because the evolutionary costs of misreading a person's character were historically higher for women than for men. The brain learned to synthesize a large amount of social information very quickly into a single felt sense. And that felt sense is what determines whether the rest of the conversation feels easy or effortful, warm or flat, alive or merely polite. What this means practically is that by the time you think you are still in the opening of an interaction, she has already formed an impression that will color everything that follows. Not an unchangeable verdict, First impressions can be revised over time, but a dominant emotional tone that now requires active contradiction to shift. The specific data she is processing in those early minutes includes the evenness of your eye contact, whether your posture is settled or managing itself, the pace at which you speak and whether it changes when she responds a certain way, whether you complete your sentences or trail off seeking confirmation, and whether your level of engagement with her seems to come from genuine interest or from the effort to produce a particular effect. She is not consciously analyzing any of these things. They arrive as a composite feeling, and that feeling is either coherent, everything pointing in the same direction, or it is fractured, with some signals contradicting others in ways that produce unease rather than attraction. Now that the mechanism is clear, the way women read beneath the surface of language to the state producing it, the two words themselves will make a different kind of sense than they would have a few minutes ago. The two words are not a line. They are not an opener. They are not something you say to her at all. They are something you have already said to yourself, so completely and so genuinely that it changes everything that comes out of your mouth afterward. The two words are, "I'm enough." Not as a mantra, not as an affirmation you repeat in the mirror before a difficult conversation, not as a performance of confidence designed to be visible. As a genuinely settled, internally inhabited belief about your own sufficiency. A quiet, unargued certainty that who you are, what you have lived, what you know and what you carry, is adequate. Not perfect, not exceptional in every dimension, simply enough. This orientation has a specific and unmistakable behavioral signature, and women read it almost immediately. A man who genuinely operates from, "I'm enough," does not seek approval inside his sentences. He does not add qualifiers at the end of opinions to soften them before she responds. He does not escalate the impressiveness of a story mid-telling because he senses she is not yet fully engaged. He does not check her face after saying something to evaluate whether it landed. The psychological mechanism behind why this registers as attractive is rooted in what attachment researchers call secure self-regard. A stable, non-contingent sense of one's own worth that does not require external validation to remain intact. Women are acutely sensitive to the presence or absence of this quality because it predicts, at an almost instinctual level, how a man will behave under pressure, under uncertainty, and in the inevitable moments when a relationship becomes difficult. A man whose sense of self depends on her approval will eventually require that approval in ways that become exhausting, controlling, or destabilizing. A man whose sense of self is internally anchored does not. Of course, "I'm enough" is not arrogance. Arrogance is a performance, a loud claim of superiority that is almost always compensating for an underlying doubt. Settled self-sufficiency is quiet. It does not need to claim anything because it is not defending against anything. Knowing the two words is one thing, but understanding exactly what they look like in practice and how a woman reads their presence or absence in real time is what makes the difference between understanding this intellectually and actually carrying it. You can hear "I'm enough" in the way a man finishes a sentence. Not in what he says, in whether he needs you to agree with it before he feels comfortable having said it. This is worth sitting with, because the behavioral expressions of this orientation are specific enough to observe and recognize, in yourself and in the effect you have on the women around you. A man carrying "I'm enough" speaks in complete sentences. He does not trail off mid-opinion with something like, "But that's just me," or, "I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that." Not because he is never uncertain, but because he does not preemptively soften his thoughts to protect himself from disapproval. When he disagrees with something she says, he says so calmly and directly, without the anxious softening that turns disagreement into a question. He does not immediately reverse his position when she pushes back, unless she has actually offered a reason that genuinely changes his view. He listens differently. A man operating from this place listens to what is actually being said, rather than listening while simultaneously preparing his next contribution. The difference is visible. His eyes stay engaged rather than slightly unfocused with internal preparation. He responds to the specific thing she said rather than the general category it belongs to. And he allows the conversation to go where it goes, rather than steering it back toward territory where he feels impressive. He allows silence without filling it anxiously. This is one of the most specific and telling behavioral tells, because silence in conversation produces social pressure, and a man who needs external validation will almost always break that pressure too quickly, reaching for a joke, a question, a new topic, anything to dissolve the discomfort of not knowing what she is currently thinking about him. A man who already knows his own worth lets the silence sit. Think back to a conversation where someone gave you their full, unhurried attention, where you felt genuinely listened to rather than processed. That feeling is almost certainly the trace of someone operating from this orientation. It is rare, and it is felt immediately. The clearest way to understand what this orientation creates is to see what its absence produces. And the specific patterns that signal its absence are ones that show up more often in older men than most would expect, for reasons that are worth understanding directly. The men who struggle most with "I'm enough" are often not the men with the least to offer. They are frequently the ones who have been through the most, and who have quietly started measuring themselves against what they used to be. This is the part that requires a certain kind of honesty, and I want to offer it without judgment, because it is genuinely important. A man in his 40s or 50s who has built a real career, raised children, navigated the end of a long relationship, watched his body change, and felt the cultural narrative about older men begin to shift around him. That man has every reason to carry some version of, "Am I still enough?" It is not weakness. It is the natural response to a real set of experiences. But when that quiet question starts shaping behavior in ways he does not fully register, it produces patterns that women read clearly even when he does not. The specific behavioral tells are these. He leads with credentials unprompted, finding ways to work his professional achievements, his past accomplishments, or his social connections into early conversation before any of it has been asked for. He inflates stories mid-telling, adding details that increase the impressiveness of an account that was already interesting without them. He checks her response after making a statement about himself. A slight pause, a brief glance, waiting to see if it registered. He agrees with her assessments of things more readily than his actual opinions would support, adjusting his stated views to match hers rather than offering the friction of genuine disagreement. None of these behaviors are dishonest in a deliberate sense. They are the completely understandable output of a man who has more riding on this interaction than he is consciously aware of. But she reads them. Not as character flaws, but as signals that his sense of self is contingent on her response, and that contingency will eventually cost them both something. Remember what I said at the start, that the two words operate at a level that bypasses everything a woman thinks she is looking for, and that their presence or absence shapes every interaction in ways most men never see. We are at the final piece now. Recognizing the pattern is the first movement, but there is one final layer to this that almost no one addresses, and it is the piece that makes the difference between a man who understands this concept and a man who actually lives it. You cannot perform "I'm enough," because performing it requires checking whether she believes it, which means you don't. This is the deepest truth in everything covered today, and it is the one that matters most practically. Because the natural response to learning about an orientation like this is to try to adopt it as a behavior, to start speaking more definitively, to practice allowing silences, to consciously stop trailing off at the end of opinions. And those behavioral adjustments are not worthless. But if they are performed without genuine internal foundation, she will feel the performance. What performance requires is monitoring. You adjust a behavior, and then you watch to see whether it produced the intended effect. That watching is the tell. It is the subtle checking of her face, the slight recalibration of energy based on her response, the underlying anxiety beneath the confident surface that is still fundamentally asking the same old question. Am I enough for her? The only path to genuinely carrying this orientation is internal. And the good news, the real good news, is that every resource required to build it is already available to a man who has actually lived. You have made decisions under uncertainty and survived them. You have built things, lost things, and continued. You have learned, the hard way and the slow way, what actually matters and what does not. You have a body of real experience behind you that no younger man can claim, and most of it points toward the same quiet conclusion. You handled it. Not perfectly, but you handled it. That accumulated evidence of your own sufficiency is not something to announce. It is something to inhabit. And when you do, when the two words stop being a concept and become a genuinely settled state, the conversations change. Not because you said something different, because the place you were speaking from was different. And she felt it before you finished your first sentence. Everything in this video points toward a single unified truth, and it is worth naming simply now that all the pieces are visible. The two words, "I'm enough," are not a communication strategy. They are the foundation beneath all communication. When they are genuinely present, every sentence a man speaks carries a coherence that women register as deeply attractive before they can fully account for why. When they are absent, even the most carefully chosen words produce an experience of effortfulness, of someone working toward an impression rather than simply being one. The overarching principle is this: women do not fall for what you say. They fall for the state you are in when you say it. You now have something concrete and real. A clear understanding of what the two words actually are, what they look like in behavior, what their absence looks and feels like, and why the experience of genuinely carrying them cannot be faked. That understanding is worth something even before anything changes, because awareness is always the first movement. You do not need to overhaul your personality or perform a version of yourself you have not yet earned. The orientation is built from the inside, from the evidence of your own life, and that evidence is already there. Be honest with yourself for a moment. When you are talking to a woman you find genuinely attractive, which pattern shows up more? The settled version or the seeking version? Drop settled or seeking in the comments. No judgment here, just honesty. I read every comment, and those answers genuinely shape what comes next on this channel. If understanding the psychology beneath attraction is what brings you here, subscribing means you will not miss what is coming, because this channel does not stay at the surface. In the next video, I'm going to show you the 3 specific conversational habits that signal the opposite of "I'm enough." Patterns that are far more common in older men than most realize, and that quietly undo everything the two words are supposed to build.